Hello and welcome to this week's press preview alongside Scott Richey. I'm Aren Dow. We got one more week until we hit the playoffs, and there are a lot of really good matchups this week to kind of look at. People fighting to get into the playoffs teams playing each other, kind of vying for a home game this week. But we'll start with the 4-win teams, and there's a handful of them looking to get that 5th win, and obviously you need playoff points along with that 5th win. But there's a couple teams, Scott, who are you kind of looking at as far as those 4-win teams looking to make it in this last week?
One of them, it's an all South Central matchup. Pana has Hillsborough. They're both 4-4. Actually, have both beaten the same 4 South Central conference teams, kind of the bottom of the barrel, as it were, in the conference this year. And if you just look at scoring, points allowed, points scored, pretty similar. So I'm not sure if you can make a lot of the matchup just looking at the numbers. Pana, though, is playing pretty well of late. Week 4, they made a switch at quarterback, went to a sophomore, Rhett Zaradka, and they're 3-2 since. I mean, he doesn't throw the ball a lot, but Pana's not, hasn't really, thrown the ball a lot. But when he does, he's pretty successful. Runs the ball a little bit too. So they kind of put they have a really good, streak of playoff seasons under Al Stupek on the line. They put that on in sophomore, and so far, with the big game coming up against Hillsborough, that's worked out for them.
Another in-conference, Taylorville Southeast. Taylorville has 4 wins, looking to get that number 5. And you look at Taylorville, and it's the last year in the CS8, and it looks, especially from this year, it looks like a good move to go out to the Apollo, where it's a little more balanced. Every game this year, there hasn't been a closer game than 22 points. Either they've won or they lost. It's either a blowout win or a blowout loss. And I think, kind of looking away from this game just in general, Taylorville, I think it's a good move for, going to the Apollo and having teams that are a little more, similar in size, a little more. I think that'll be kind of a good transition. But as far as the game goes with Southeast, Southeast has, 3 wins this year, which is, a little bit better than they have in previous season. I know they had 3 wins previous last year too, but. I think Taylorville, the running game has been really good this year. I think for them, I think they're probably the favorite in this matchup for sure. And for them to get that 5th win, it'd be kind of nice to get that the last year in the Central State 8.
It kind of moved from Taylorville being a favorite against Southeast to Effingham has to be considered the underdog against Mahomet Seymour. It's an out-of-conference game, but a game that's been played several times the last few years. It's kind of a typical week 9 matchup for the Hearts. It's going to be tough. I mean, Mahomet is 7-1. They just lost their first game this last week against Normal U-High. It was also undefeated at the time. And Mahomet lost, big. It was a 55-8 U-High win. But I don't think you can look at that game and say, well, maybe Mahomet's reeling at the end of the season. They have only given up more than 2 touchdowns twice this year, once to U-High, who scored definitely more than 2. But they're a tough team. Easily kind of handled Mount Zion. Week 1, kind of looking at an Apollo comparison. And Effingham did beat Mount Zion last week. To make this a must-win game. For a playoff spot. So big win for the Hearts there against the Braves. But they're going to run into one of their toughest opponents of the year, again, Mahomet Seymour. And it would be a miracle for a win. But things like that have happened and. Will happen and do happen, but they just need to get a great game. Everything from Dylan Wolf at quarterback. He stepped in when Kevin Doherty broke his collarbone. Although there's been some maybe this is about when Doherty was supposed to be back with that collarbone injury. He did not play though against Mount Zion, but they have some good receivers. If they move the ball on the ground a little bit. Which they were able to do pretty well with Billy Arndt against Mount Zion. I think that definitely is going to help them open up the passing game. And they're going to need all of it, though, to beat Mahomet. It's going to be a tough one.
And the other out-of-conference matchup, Newton is going for their 5th win against Paris. And Newton, kind of looking, it didn't look too good. They had a couple wins heading into the game against Olney and then pulled off a really big upset. I know Mitch Bierman had a really big game on the ground. He had about 145 yards. And, for them, they kind of got they're right in their stride right now. Brock Ramoser's playing really well at quarterback. And if you're kind of looking at, Paris, there's not a whole lot of similar games to look at. Paris did play Cumberland week 1, and it was a 12-6 win for Paris. So that's about as close as you can get as far as kind of the overlap of these two teams of who they played. I know obviously Newton hasn't played Cumberland, but in the same conference. So you kind of, that's about as similar as it gets. And I think Newton has a pretty good shot to get that 5th win in this game. Paris, they've put up points here and there. They had 33 against Mount Zion, and then they had a big game against Charleston. But for the most part, I think they've kind of struggled a little bit. I think if Newton keeps that offense under wraps, they got a real good shot at getting that 5th win.
This is definitely a winnable game for Newton.
Yeah.
Paris is 3-5. Those 3 teams they have beaten have 4 wins combined this year. So once they run into some teams that are playing really competitive football. You say they put up 33 against Mount Zion. Well, they gave up 7.
Yeah, they did.
So if Newton is playing probably some of his best football right now, so they have a legitimate chance to pick up that 5th win.
And obviously, there's a lot of really good games against playoff teams where, for the most part, everyone's in. There are the 5-win team that kind of looking to get those playoff points. But so a lot of these Week 9 games, there's huge implications. Will they be able to get a home game for that first playoff game? And the first, being St. Teresa Monticello, which not only has a home game on the line, but also the Ocala Black title on the line too.
Yeah, and with a win for St. T, that is an undisputed Ocala Black title. If they lose, I believe it'll be a 3-way split between them, Monticello, and Unity. Everyone's beat someone once in that group. It's kind of an interesting matchup. It's definitely who's going to do what they do best, the best. And at this point in the season, right now, it's St. T. Their offense is definitely leading the way. And for Monticello, it's their defense, and that's going to be an interesting matchup to see who kind of pushes things a little further. Can St. T move the ball? With Christian Williams and Chris Isom running it, Christian finding some receivers to move the ball through the air, or will Monticello's defense do what they've done all year and tighten up? Kind of an interesting note for the Sages that made a quarterback switch last week to Brandon Wildman, and he had a really good game. They don't throw the ball a lot, and when they do, they haven't been terribly successful this year. But Wildman, was 10 of 16 for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns to Josh Burton, who had a second consecutive 100-yard receiving game. So if Wildman's the guy at quarterback, he showed at least last week that he can do some things back there. And of course they have Dylan Nisley, Andrew Bailey, in the run game, who've been pretty just consistently solid all year. So if maybe Monticello's offense bumps things up a little bit, St. T's defense, which at times has struggled against Shelbyville, Shelbyville's short passing game hurt them. St. T's run defense has been pretty solid though all year long. So if Monticello's coming up with the offense, St. T's got to match that with the defense. And I think the other way around kind of cancels each other out. It should be a tight, close game, I would imagine.
For sure. And on the Ocala Blue side of things, Argenna's taking on Tuscola. And Tuscola has 5 wins, and kind of looking at playoff points, it's really hard to kind of see who everything shakes out with still a whole week left to go. But it looks like they'll be kind of right on the cusp. But Argenna, they got that 6th win last week, and Gage Ella came back, and I saw that game. He looked really good. It looked like he didn't have any rust. It looked like he had been there pretty much the whole time, and that has a lot to do. Their defense also. Not just on the offensive side, but the defensive side, especially in a game like Tuscola, who throws the ball so much. Having someone like Gage Eller who can kind of, he's really smart on the defensive side. He broke up a play last week and had a pick 6 for a touchdown and kind of broke down the play. Argenna's run defense has been really good all year. If they can, able to stop Tuscola's passing game, which, Nick Bates has done a really good job this year and put up some amazing numbers. I think it's going to be a really good game. I think this game really has a chance to be just a kind of a high-scoring, shoot-'em-out type game. I think Tuscola has a big play potential. I think Argenna definitely has big play potential. It'll be interesting to see, how this game shakes out, and if Argenna can get this and get that 7th win, that'll go a long way in getting that first home game.
Yeah, and last year's game, between these two teams, Argenna got the W, kept Tuscola out of the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a similar situation this year. But Tuscola, last year, starting a bunch of freshmen who are now sophomores with a little more experience, they kept it close, last year for the most part of 3 quarters. I think, a couple turnovers, later in the second half kind of hurt them. But I think you're right. Tuscola has shown, they put up huge, offensive numbers against Central A&M a couple weeks ago. And, they have that potential. Argenta, obviously, if they have everyone healthy and, don't even need a lot of carries for some of those running backs to have huge games too.
Another big matchup, Arthur Leamington at Hammond playing Bismarck Henning, who's undefeated this season. And Arthur's, they've had, they lost a game, one of the good games against, Sarah Gordon. They've won against a pretty good team in Villa Grove. Bismarck Henning, they've had a pretty easy schedule so far. So, this week against Arthur, the only other really big game, they won 3 points, had a 3-point win against Salt Fork. So, for both teams, this is kind of a gauge of see how they can, what this run could be like. It looks like in 1A. Bismarck, they're kind of right in that line. And we'll talk, Maroa is kind of on that line too between 1A and 2A. I think Bismarck probably has a better shot of getting bumped up. But regardless, both playoff teams between Arthur and Bismarck. And, this is a game I really liked before the season started to kind of see, where the Knights are. Are they able to kind of make that jump and, get a playoff win or two? And I think this game will kind of go a long way into seeing how that goes.
Yeah, and Arthur's, one loss against Cerro Gordo, their offense, just did not get going. But since, they've, Tyler Schuring's, done some Tyler Schuring things at quarterback. He has a lot of, good weapons in the passing game, Jordan Fagan, Curtis Pike. And then, he'll tuck and run, quite a bit. And he's, a pretty good-sized quarterback. He's tough to bring down. And, we'll have to see if Bismarck Henning, can handle, some competition. They did beat Salt Fork. They're 7-1. Salt Fork is, but this will be, only the third, playoff team that Bismarck Henning will play in Arthur, and the third one will, eventually come because Georgetown Ridge Farm and Westville are both 4-4 and play each other this week. So one of those two, they have enough playoff points they'll get in. So Bismarck Henning kind of gets a backdoor third playoff team on their schedule.
This is definitely one of the better defense I think Bismarck's seen in Arthur. They played really good defense against Villa Grove. Even better if you kind of comparison between that Cerro Gordo game and the Arthur game. Arthur's defense has played really well too. They get those big point games, but they kind of got both sides of the ball going.
Yeah, and speaking of defense, kind of takes us to our last matchup of playoff bound teams. It's a pair of 5-3 teams in the Big 12 Conference, MacArthur and Bloomington, and both should be fine. With 5 wins, they pick up a lot of playoff points from Community and West up in Normal, so that's not really going to be an issue. What should be an issue for the Generals is are they going to be able to stop the run? Because the last 3 opponents have all run the ball up the middle pretty well against MacArthur, and I'm sure Bloomington's got a more than veteran coach Enrico Smelzer. He's been there 20 plus years. So he's seen that on film. He's seen teams just exploit what's become a soft middle of the Generals defense, and I'm sure Coach Spates at MacArthur has seen that too the last few weeks, and is a focal point in practice. MacArthur, they have the talent to make a run in the playoffs, and that it gets more difficult just for the fact they only have 5 wins, because they're going to be looking at a road game, and probably it's going to be either at Springfield, Sacred Heart, Griffin, or at Normal U-High. Both teams that have played just tremendous football this year, and that's not going to be easy for MacArthur. But first, of course, that was Bloomington, and a 6-win. It's probably not going to get them out of playing SHG or U-High, but at least they'll go into the playoffs with a little momentum.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You look at the last couple of games MacArthur's had. The Danville game, their offense was flying that first half, and then the second half, they really couldn't get anything going. And then the game against Urbana, they got to a big lead, and granted the offense really didn't have much to do with it because they had Urbana had 3 onside kicks, but MacArthur seems to get out fast, and then for some reason, I don't know whether you believe in momentum or not or what, but they've had issues with kind of keeping that going and keeping that big play potential, which they definitely have at really the passing game and the running game. Sean Shutter's Space can make anything happen, and Jaquay Owens is a really good running back, so they have that potential. It's just a matter of kind of keeping that throughout the entire game.
And they'll have to do that against Bloomington.
Yeah.
MacArthur will get into the 5A playoffs with 5 wins. They're going to be one of the last teams in, I would think, with 5 wins. Just kind of depends on there's a few 4 win teams in 5A that I think have potential to jump up and get in the playoffs, and that's going to bump MacArthur down. But a win I think is needed at this point because they can't go in to the playoffs off a loss to normal community and off a kind of a backdoor win against Urbana. They'll give up 30 unanswered and then need kind of a desperation touchdown to win it. If they lose to Bloomington, that's just gonna. I mean, if you believe in momentum, there's kind of a lot of people say momentum doesn't exist, but these are high school kids, and they're thinking about the last thing that happened to them. And if it's a loss to Bloomington, that's not going to be good.
Kind of leaving you with Moreau Forsyth. As always talk, last year this happened. This year they're right in the bubble too, the 1A and 2A. I don't do the whole playoff. I leave that to smart people like Justin Kahn, who, if you go to the HR Preps blog, he kind of broke it down to what he thought, for each class, where the playoff teams are going to fall. And he has Moreau as the second largest 1A team. And, basically what it comes down to, there's about 13 4-4 teams in 1A. If a bunch of those win, that could bump them up. We'll see how it goes. There's a lot of football still has to be played. And so I know the selection that's going to be happening Saturday on October 26th. So make sure to check that out. That's on Comcast Sports Net if you want to watch that. Otherwise, we got all Week 9 action ready to go, and make sure you check out Press Pick'em. We got a couple weeks left on that, and we'll see you out there.